Listen to me carefully.
Some of you in this room are tired, not because life is hard, but because you've been asking the wrong people for help. You've been knocking on doors, crying to people, leaning on shoulders that were never strong enough to carry your destiny. And now you're frustrated, confused, even doubting yourself. But I came to tell you something today. It's not that your dream is wrong, it's that your direction for support is wrong. Oh yes, because when you go to the wrong people, they will drain you instead of develop you. They will question you instead of cover you. They will limit you instead of lift you. So today, we're going to expose it. We're going to break it. And we're going to fix it. Because your future is too important to be placed in the hands of people who were never assigned to help you. Let me stay right there for a moment, because this one is deeper than it looks. Some of you keep going back to the same people saying, "What do you think about this idea? Do you think I can do it? Should I try?" And every single time you open your mouth, they close your vision. Every time you rise up with excitement, they respond with hesitation. Every time you bring light, they bring shadows. And you keep calling it advice. But let me tell you the truth, what you're receiving is not wisdom. It's limitation dressed up as concern. See, discouragement doesn't always come loudly. It doesn't always sound like you can't do it. Sometimes it sounds like, "Are you sure? That's risky. People like us don't usually do things like that. Maybe you should just play it safe." And if you're not careful, those soft words will slowly kill a powerful dream. Because discouragement is dangerous not because it's aggressive, but because it's consistent. It keeps dripping little by little until your confidence starts to erode, until you begin to second guess what you once believed in with certainty. And now you're stuck not because you don't have potential, but because you've been surrounded by people who only know how to see limits. You've got to understand something. People can only give you what they have. If they have fear, they will give you fear. If they have doubt, they will give you doubt. If they have never stepped out of their comfort zone, they will never encourage you to step out of yours. So when they speak, they're not speaking over your future, they're speaking from their past. And that's where many of you get trapped. You think they're protecting you, but they're actually projecting onto you, projecting their failures, their disappointments, their missed chances. They're not trying to hurt you, but they are limiting you. And if you keep listening long enough, you'll start shrinking your own vision to fit their comfort. You'll start saying, "Maybe I am aiming too high. Maybe I should just settle. Maybe this isn't for me," not because it's true, but because it's been repeated. Let me ask you something: how many dreams have died? Not because they were impossible, but because they were constantly discouraged. How many ideas never got a chance to grow because someone spoke doubt into them at the very beginning? You don't kill a tree by cutting it down, you can kill it by never letting it grow. And some people around you have been doing exactly that. Not watering your vision, not supporting your growth, just quietly starving it with negativity. And what makes it worse is you trust them, you respect them, you value their opinion. So when they speak, it carries weight. But listen carefully. Just because someone is close to you does not mean they are called to guide you. Closeness does not equal correctness. Some people are meant to love you, but not lead you. Some people are meant to support you emotionally, but not direct you mentally. And if you confuse those roles, you will keep going to the wrong source for the right answer. You'll keep asking people who are afraid to be bold whether you should be bold. You'll keep asking people who avoid risk whether you should take a risk. You'll keep asking people who settled whether you should settle. And what do you think they're going to say? They're going to pull you back into the same space they never had the courage to leave. That's why you have to become protective over your vision. Not everybody deserves access to your dreams in their early stages. Not everybody has earned the right to speak into your future. Because words matter, energy matters, influence matters. And if every conversation leaves you feeling smaller, more doubtful, more hesitant, then you are not being advised, you are being discouraged. And you've got to recognize it for what it is. This is a moment where you stop going back to the same voices expecting a different result. This is a moment where you say, "I hear you, but I can't let that define me." Because your dream doesn't need agreement from everyone, it needs alignment with the right ones. The right people won't always tell you it's easy, but they will tell you it's possible. They won't shrink your vision, they will stretch your capacity. They won't feed your fear, they will build your faith. So if every time you speak you feel shut down instead of lifted up, that's your sign. You're not in the wrong path. You're just listening to the wrong voices. Now let's go deeper, because this one right here is subtle, but it's powerful. You go to someone for help, you open your heart, you start explaining what you're going through, what you're trying to build, what's been weighing on your mind, and before you can even finish your sentence, they take over the conversation. Suddenly, it's no longer about you. It becomes their story, their struggle, their experience, their opinion. You walked in carrying a question, but now you're carrying their emotions. And you leave that conversation more confused than when you started. That's how you know you're asking the wrong people, because the wrong people don't listen to understand, they listen to respond. They don't create space for your growth, they redirect the spotlight to themselves. And at first you don't even notice it. It feels like a conversation. It feels normal. You think, maybe this is just how they relate, Dot. But over time it starts to wear on you. Because every time you need clarity, you end up navigating through their noise. Every time you need direction, you get detoured into their personal history. And let me be clear, there's nothing wrong with people sharing experiences. That can be helpful. That can be powerful. But there's a difference between someone who shares to support you and someone who shifts the focus to control the moment. One empowers you, the other consumes you. See, some people don't know how to help unless they are at the center of the conversation. They measure their value by how much they can say, not by how much they can understand. So instead of asking you questions, they give you conclusions. Instead of exploring your situation, they override it. Instead of helping you think, they tell you what to think. And now you're stuck trying to filter their voice from your own. That's dangerous. Because when someone constantly makes it about themselves, they rob you of something critical. They rob you of your ability to process your own journey. You don't get the chance to fully express your thoughts. You don't get the chance to hear yourself clearly. You don't get the chance to grow through reflection. Everything becomes rushed, redirected, and reshaped by someone else's perspective. And here's the truth you need to understand. Your life is not a copy of their life. What worked for them may not work for you. What failed for them may not fail for you. What they fear may not even apply to your situation. But if they dominate every conversation, you'll start making decisions based on their story instead of your purpose. And slowly, without realizing it, you'll begin to live a life that fits their narrative instead of your calling. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how draining it feels? You go in needing help and you come out carrying more weight than you brought in. You feel unheard. You feel overlooked. You feel like your voice didn't even matter. That's not support. That's emotional imbalance. Because the right people will create space for you. They will slow down and say, talk to me. Help me understand. They will ask questions that unlock your thinking, not shut it down. They will guide you without overpowering you. But the wrong people, they dominate. They interrupt, they assume, they impose, and sometimes it's not even intentional. Sometimes they think they're helping. Sometimes they believe their experience is the answer to everything. But good intentions don't always produce good results. If every conversation leaves you feeling smaller, quieter, less confident in your own voice, then something is off. You should never have to fight to be heard when you're asking for help. And some of you have been doing exactly that. Fighting for space in conversations that were supposed to support you. Explaining yourself over and over again. Trying to bring the focus back, but it keeps slipping away. And you've been tolerating it because you don't want to seem disrespectful. Because you don't want to hurt feelings. Because you think, maybe I'm expecting too much. No, you're not expecting too much. You're just expecting it from the wrong people. Because the right people won't make you compete for attention when you're in a moment of need. They won't turn your vulnerability into their stage. They won't make your situation secondary to their ego. They will meet you where you are and help you rise from there. So you've got to start paying attention. Not just to what people say, but to how they make you feel when you speak. Do you feel heard? Or do you feel dismissed? Do you feel guided? Or do you feel overshadowed? Because that feeling is telling you something. And this is where growth begins. You start setting boundaries. You start choosing who gets access to your thoughts, your struggles, your vision. You stop explaining your life to people who only want to hear themselves talk. You stop seeking clarity from voices that only create more noise. And you begin to recognize that real support is not loud, it's intentional. It listens, it considers, it respects. So the next time you go to someone for help, pay attention. If the conversation constantly circles back to them, if your voice keeps getting lost, if your needs are being replaced by their narrative, that's your sign. You're not being guided. You're being overshadowed. And it's time to find people who know how to listen as powerfully as they speak. Let's deal with this one honestly, because it's where a lot of confusion is born. You keep asking people for direction, for clarity, for guidance, but they've never been where you're trying to go. And somehow you're expecting accurate answers from people who have no experience in your destination. That's like asking someone for directions to a place they've never visited. They might sound confident, they might even give you detailed instructions, but confidence without experience is still guesswork. And guesswork will cost you time. See, the problem is not that they're bad people. The problem is that they are unqualified for the assignment you're giving them. And when you seek qualified answers from unqualified sources, you don't get clarity, you get confusion. Because they're not speaking from knowledge, they're speaking from assumption. They're not guiding from experience, they're advising from imagination. And imagination can be dangerous when it's leading your decisions. Some of you have been delaying your progress, not because you lack ability, but because you've been taking direction from people who have never built what you're trying to build, never faced what you're trying to face, never achieved what you're trying to achieve. So when you say, I want to start this business, they respond with fear because they've never started one. When you say, I want to grow, I want more, they respond with limitation because they've never stepped beyond where they are. When you say, I see something bigger for my life, they respond with doubt because they've never seen beyond their own boundaries. And now you're standing there questioning your vision, not because it's wrong, but because the voices around you don't have the capacity to understand it. Let me tell you something clearly. Insight requires experience. You cannot expect someone to give you strategies for a level they have never reached. They might love you. They might care about you. But love does not equal expertise. And this is where many people get stuck. You confuse emotional connection with directional authority. Just because someone is close to you doesn't mean they're equipped to guide you. Just because they've been in your life for years doesn't mean they have the wisdom for your next level. And if you're not careful, you will keep recycling the same limited advice over and over again, wondering why your life is not moving forward, because you're asking questions in rooms that don't have the answers. Think about it if you want to grow financially. Why are you asking someone who is struggling financially how to do it? If you want discipline, why are you asking someone who lacks consistency? If you want success in a certain field, why are you consulting people who have never even stepped into that field? It doesn't make sense, but we do it all the time. And then we get frustrated when things don't change. But the truth is, your results are often shaped by the quality of the voices you listen to. If the voices lack experience, your direction will lack precision. And that leads to hesitation. It leads to second guessing. It leads to moving in circles instead of moving forward. Because you're trying to build something real on advice that is not rooted in reality. Let me challenge you, start asking yourself, has this person done what I'm trying to do? Not perfectly, not completely, but at least enough to understand the path. Because there's a difference between theory and experience. Theory sounds good. Experience works. Theory says, this might happen. Experience says, I've seen this before. Theory guesses. Experience guides. And if you want to move forward with confidence, you need voices that are grounded in something real, not just opinions, not just assumptions, not just surface level understanding. You need people who have walked through the process, people who have made mistakes, learned lessons, adjusted and grown. People who can say, I know this part is hard, but here's how you get through it. That kind of guidance doesn't confuse you, why? It sharpens you. But when you keep going to people without that experience, you end up overwhelmed with conflicting advice. One person says go left, another says go right, someone else says stop completely. And now you're stuck paralyzed, not because the path doesn't exist, but because you've been listening to too many voices that don't know the way. And here's what you need to understand. Everyone has an opinion, but not everyone has authority. And you've got to learn the difference. Because if you don't, you will keep giving weight to words that don't deserve it. You will keep elevating opinions that have no foundation. You will keep allowing uncertainty to guide decisions that require clarity. And your life is too important for that. This is where maturity comes in. You start filtering who you listen to. You stop asking everybody. You become intentional about your sources. You look for alignment. You look for credibility. You look for evidence, not perfection, but proof that they understand the journey you're on. Because when you find the right voices, something shifts. Your confusion starts to clear. Your confidence starts to rise. Your direction becomes sharper. Not because the journey gets easier, but because now you're being guided by someone who actually knows the terrain. So if you've been feeling lost, stuck, uncertain, don't just look at your situation. Look at your sources. Because sometimes the issue is not that you don't have answers, it's that you've been asking the wrong people to give them. Now this one is uncomfortable because it forces you to see something you may have been trying to ignore. Not everybody around you is clapping for you the way you think they are. Some people smile with you, talk with you, even advise you, but deep down, there's a quiet competition happening in their heart. And it's not always obvious. It's subtle. It hides behind jokes, behind small comments, behind a certain tone when you share your wins. You say something good happened, and instead of pure excitement, you feel hesitation from them. You feel a shift. You feel like your success made the room a little colder. That's not your imagination. Because some people don't mind you doing well, they just don't want you doing better than them. And that's a dangerous place to seek help from. Because when someone is secretly competing with you, they cannot guide you honestly. Their advice will always be filtered through comparison. Their support will always have conditions attached to it, conditions you can't see, but you can feel. They might not tell you to stop, but they won't push you forward either. They'll give you just enough encouragement to keep things comfortable, but not enough to help you break through. They'll celebrate you in public, but question you in private. They'll say, that's great, but their energy will say, don't go too far, Dot. And if you're not paying attention, you'll start adjusting yourself to keep them comfortable. You'll shrink your wins. You'll downplay your progress. You'll hesitate to share your goals because you can sense that your growth is creating tension. Let me tell you something clearly. Real support does not compete. People who are truly for you don't measure your success against theirs. They don't feel threatened by your growth. They don't need you to stay small so they can feel big. They are secure enough to celebrate you fully. But insecure people, they struggle with that. Because every time you rise, it reminds them of where they are. Every time you step forward, it highlights the steps they didn't take. And instead of using that as motivation, they internalize it as pressure. And now, without saying it directly, they start pulling you back. Not aggressively, but strategically. They'll question your timing. They'll doubt your readiness. They'll suggest you slow down. Not because it's what's best for you, but because it's what feels safer for them. And here's the part that makes it even more complicated. They might not even realize they're doing it. Competition doesn't always come from hate. Sometimes it comes from insecurity. Sometimes it comes from comparison that has been building quietly over time. But whether it's intentional or not, the impact is the same. It limits you because you cannot grow freely in an environment where your progress is being measured against someone else's comfort. You cannot think clearly when the advice you're receiving is influenced by hidden rivalry. And you definitely cannot reach your full potential if you're constantly adjusting yourself to avoid making someone else uncomfortable. That's not growth, that's restriction. So you've got to start observing more closely. Pay attention to how people respond when you talk about your goals. Pay attention to their energy when you succeed. Pay attention to whether they push you forward or subtly hold you back. Because words can be deceiving, but energy reveals truth. Do they genuinely want to see you win? Or do they want to see you stay within a range they can handle? Because there's a difference. The right people will challenge you to go higher, even if it surpasses them. They will pour into you, even if it means you outgrow them. They will support your expansion even if it stretches their own perspective. Why? Because they're not competing with you, they're connected to you. But the wrong people, they keep score. They compare timelines. They compare achievements. They compare recognition. And when they feel like they're falling behind, instead of rising up, they try to level the field by slowing you down. And if you're not careful, you'll start listening to that. You'll start hesitating at the edge of your next step, not because you're unsure, but because you've absorbed their discomfort. You'll start questioning your pace, your direction, your ambition, not because it's wrong, but because it's making someone else uneasy. And that's how people lose momentum. Not because they lacked ability, but because they were surrounded by quiet competition disguised as support. So you've got to make a decision. You've got to stop seeking guidance from people who are internally measuring themselves against you, because they cannot lead you to a place they are emotionally resisting. They cannot help you rise if your rise feels like their loss. And your future is too important to be influenced by someone else's insecurity. This is where you take your power back. You stop explaining your growth to people who feel threatened by it. You stop asking for advice from people who are not emotionally aligned with your success. And you start surrounding yourself with those who can celebrate you without comparison, support you without hesitation, and push you without fear. Because when you have that kind of environment, something shifts. You don't feel guilty for growing. You don't feel pressure to shrink. You don't feel the need to hold back. You move freely. You think boldly. You act confidently. Not because everything is perfect, but because you're no longer being pulled back by invisible competition. So if you've been feeling resistance, tension, hesitation, don't ignore it. Look closer. Because sometimes the reason you're not moving forward is not because you can't. It's because someone around you is quietly hoping you won't. Now this one right here will open your eyes because it sounds good on the surface, but it falls apart in reality. Some people are full of words, full of advice, full of opinions. They can tell you exactly what you should do, how you should move, what steps you should take. They speak with confidence. They sound convincing. They even make you feel motivated for a moment. But when it's time to do something, when it's time for action, when it's time for support beyond words, they disappear. And now you're standing there trying to build something real, holding on to advice that has no backing, no presence, no substance behind it. That's how you know you're asking the wrong people. Because real support is not just heard, it is felt. It shows up. It stands with you. It moves when you move. Anybody can talk. Anybody can give you a list of things to do. Anybody can sit on the sidelines and analyze your life like it's a game they're not playing. But very few people will step into the field with you. Very few people will say, I'm not just going to tell you I'm going to walk with you. And that's the difference. See, advice without action is easy. It costs nothing. It requires no sacrifice, no commitment, no accountability. People can throw words at you all day long and never have to prove any of it. But real support, that requires something deeper. It requires presence. It requires consistency. It requires showing up when things are not convenient, when things are uncertain, when things are uncomfortable. And the wrong people, they don't have that capacity. They'll hype you up in conversation, but they won't stand with you in execution. They'll say, you got this, but they won't help you carry anything. They'll cheer from a distance, but they won't come close enough to make a difference. And at first, you might not notice it, because words can be powerful. Words can make you feel strong for a moment. Words can give you temporary confidence. But when reality hits, when the work begins, when the pressure rises, when the challenges show up, that's when you start looking around. And suddenly, it's quiet. No support, no presence, no action. Just echoes of what was said. And that's when it becomes clear what you thought was support was just conversation. Let me tell you something you need to hold on to. Guidance without involvement can only take you so far. At some point, you need people who don't just speak into your life, you need people who stand in your life. People who are willing to invest their time, their energy, their effort, not just their opinions. Because when someone truly supports you, you don't have to question it. They check on you. They follow up. They stay engaged. They show up when it matters. Not perfectly, but intentionally. But when you're dealing with the wrong people, there's a pattern. They're available when it's easy, but absent when it's necessary. They're vocal when it's theoretical, but silent when it becomes practical. They'll give you a blueprint, but won't help you build. And that creates a dangerous gap, because now you're trying to execute something real with no reinforcement, no accountability, no partnership. You're carrying everything alone while still holding on to words that made it sound like you wouldn't be. And that disconnects, it drains you. It makes you question yourself. It makes you wonder if you're asking for too much, expecting too much, needing too much, but you're not. You're just expecting action from people who only offer words. And you've got to recognize that difference. Because if you don't, you'll keep building relationships based on what people say instead of what they do. You'll keep trusting voices that sound supportive, but never actually support you. And over time, that will wear you down. Not because you're weak, but because you've been carrying weight that was never meant to be carried alone. So this is where you shift your perspective. You stop being impressed by words. You stop measuring support by how good it sounds. And you start watching behavior. Who shows up when things get real? Who stays when things get hard? Who follows through when it counts? Because that's where real support lives, not in conversation, but in consistency. The right people might not always have the perfect words. They might not always say everything right, but they will be there. They will stand with you in the process. They will move with you, adjust with you, grow with you. And that kind of support, it changes everything. It strengthens you. It grounds you. It reminds you that you're not alone in what you're building. But the wrong people, they leave you inspired but unsupported, motivated but isolated, encouraged but alone in execution. And that's not sustainable. So you've got to make a decision. Stop leaning on people who only exist in your life as voices. Stop depending on people who disappear when it's time to act. Because your vision deserves more than empty agreement. It deserves real alignment, real presence, real partnership. And when you finally surround yourself with people who don't just talk but walk, you'll feel the difference immediately. You won't have to wonder where they stand. You'll see it, not in what they say, but in what they're willing to do. Now this one, you don't even need anybody to explain it to you because you felt it. You've walked away from certain conversations feeling heavy, tired, unsettled, and you couldn't quite explain why. Nothing dramatic was said. No argument happened. No clear offense was made. But something in you shifted. Your energy dropped. Your clarity faded. Your motivation weakened. And you tried to ignore it. You told yourself, maybe I'm just overthinking. But deep down you knew. That wasn't just a conversation. That was a transfer. Because every interaction carries energy. Every person you engage with either adds to you or takes from you. And when you keep going to the wrong people for help, you don't just leave without answers, you leave asterisk, drained asterisk. See, the wrong people don't just lack the ability to guide you, they have the ability to exhaust you. They bring negativity wrapped in normal conversation. They bring doubt disguised as realism. They bring pressure masked as concern. So while you're sitting there thinking you're getting help, your spirit is slowly being weighed down. And the dangerous part is it doesn't happen all at once. It's subtle. It's one conversation where you feel a little less confident, another where you feel a little more uncertain, another where your excitement fades just a bit, until eventually you don't feel like yourself anymore. The same vision that once energized you now feels heavy. The same goals that once excited you now feel distant. The same drive that pushed you forward now feels weak. And you start asking, what happened to me? Nothing happened to your vision. You've just been around energy that couldn't sustain it. Because not everybody has the capacity to hold your growth. Some people carry so much negativity, so much doubt, so much unresolved frustration within themselves that whenever you come to them, they don't just respond, they release. They release their fears onto you. They release their pessimism onto you. They release their emotional weight onto you. And now you're walking away carrying things that were never yours. That's why you feel tired. Not because you're doing too much, but because you're absorbing too much. You're absorbing energy that conflicts with where you're trying to go. Let me tell you something clearly. You cannot build a strong future while constantly draining your present. Energy is a resource, just like time, just like focus, just like effort. And if you keep giving it to the wrong people, you will have nothing left for the things that actually matter. You'll sit down to work and feel exhausted before you even begin. You'll try to focus and your mind will feel cluttered. You'll try to move forward and something will keep pulling you back. And it won't always be visible, but it will always be felt. Because you've been pouring into conversations that pour nothing back into you. Now understand this, it's not about cutting everyone off or isolating yourself. This is about awareness. This is about recognizing that not every voice deserves your energy. Not every conversation deserves your attention. Not every person deserves access to your vulnerable moments. Because your energy is directly connected to your ability to execute. If your energy is low, your focus suffers. If your energy is scattered, your decisions weaken. If your energy is drained, your progress slows. And the wrong people will keep you in that state without ever realizing it. They'll talk to you for hours, leaving you mentally exhausted. They'll fill your mind with unnecessary worry. They'll shift your attention away from what matters. And then you'll wonder why you can't move forward with the same strength you had before. It's because you've been leaking energy in places that give you nothing in return. So now you've got to start paying attention to how people affect you. Not just what they say, but how you feel after you leave them. Do you feel stronger or do you feel weaker? Do you feel clear or do you feel confused? Do you feel energized or do you feel drained? Because that feeling is not random, it's information. It's your mind and your spirit telling you whether that environment is helping you or hurting you. And you've got to start trusting it. Stop ignoring the exhaustion. Stop dismissing the heaviness. Stop brushing off the discomfort. Because those are signals. Signals that something in that connection is not aligned with your growth. And here's where the shift happens to become intentional. You don't just go to people because they're available. You don't just talk because you need to vent. You don't just share because you feel overwhelmed. You choose wisely. You protect your energy like it matters, because it does. You start creating space between you and conversations that drain you. You start limiting access to people who leave you depleted. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of purpose, because you've realized something powerful. You cannot rise consistently if you are constantly being drained. And when you finally surround yourself with the right people who pour into you, people who uplift you, people who strengthen your thinking, you will feel the difference immediately. You walk away feeling lighter, clearer, stronger, more focused. Not because your problems disappeared, but because your energy is no longer being stolen. And that changes everything. Because when your energy is protected, your vision stays alive. When your energy is strong, your actions become consistent. When your energy is aligned, your progress becomes unstoppable. So if you've been feeling tired, stuck, unmotivated, don't just look at your workload. Look at your circle. Because sometimes the reason you're not moving forward is not because you don't have what it takes. It's because you've been surrounded by people who keep taking it out of you. Now this one cuts deep because it doesn't always come with loud negativity, it comes with familiarity. Some people in your life are not resisting you because they hate you. They're resisting you because they're comfortable with the version of you they've always known. They remember who you used to be. They're used to how you used to think. They're familiar with the level you used to operate on. And every time you start talking about growth, about change, about becoming something more, they don't respond with excitement. They respond with reminders. May, you've always been like this. You tried something like that before. That's not really you. Why are you changing so much? And at first, it sounds harmless. It even sounds like they know you well. But what they're really doing is pulling you back into a version of yourself that no longer fits. Because the wrong people don't believe in growth, they believe in consistency of identity. They want you to stay recognizable. They want you to stay predictable. They want you to stay within the boundaries they've already understood. And the moment you start stepping outside of that mentally, emotionally, spiritually, they get uncomfortable. Not because your growth is wrong, but because it disrupts their comfort. See, growth requires change, new thinking, new habits, new standards, new direction. But some people don't know how to relate to the new version of you. So instead of rising to meet you, they try to pull you back to what's familiar. And they do it in subtle ways. They'll joke about your ambition. They'll question your discipline. They'll remind you of your past mistakes, not to help you grow, but to keep you grounded in what they understand. And if you're not careful, you'll start believing it. You'll start thinking, maybe I am trying to do too much. Maybe I should slow down. Maybe this isn't really who I am. Not because it's true, but because it's been repeated by people who are comfortable with your past. Let me tell you something clearly. Your past is not your permanent identity. Who you were is not who you have to remain. Growth means evolving. It means outgrowing old patterns, old mindsets, even old environments. But if you keep asking people for help who are emotionally attached to your past, they will always guide you backwards. They will give you advice that aligns with who you were, not who you're becoming. And that creates a conflict inside of you. Because now you're trying to move forward, but you're being counseled by voices that are anchored behind you. And that tension, it slows you down. It makes every step feel uncertain. It makes every decision feel heavier. It makes every move feel like you're doing something wrong when in reality you're just doing something new. And new things always feel uncomfortable to people who don't believe in growth. Because growth requires them to adjust too. If you change, the relationship changes. If you level up, the dynamic shifts. If you think differently, the conversations feel different. And not everybody is willing to make that adjustment. So instead, they resist your growth. They hold on to your old identity like it's something they need to protect. They keep bringing up who you used to be because it keeps things stable for them. But stability for them can become a limitation for you. And you've got to recognize that, because you cannot step into your next level while constantly being reminded of your last one. You cannot build a new mindset while being surrounded by people who are committed to your old one. And you definitely cannot become who you're meant to be if every time you try, someone is there to tell you, that's not you, because the truth is it is you. It's the version of you that's growing. It's the version of you that's evolving. It's the version of you that's no longer willing to stay the same. But growth requires belief. Not just your belief in yourself, but belief from the voices you allow into your space. And when you're constantly surrounded by people who don't believe in change, don't believe in improvement, don't believe in expansion, you start shrinking to fit their expectations. You start editing yourself to stay acceptable. You start limiting your actions to avoid judgment. You start holding back your potential to maintain familiarity. And that's how people stay stuck. Not because they don't have the ability to grow, but because they're surrounded by people who are committed to who they used to be. So now you've got to make a shift. You've got to stop asking for guidance from people who are invested in your past. You've got to stop explaining your future to people who are comfortable with your history. And you've got to start aligning yourself with people who see your potential, not just your patterns. People who speak to who you're becoming, not just who you've been. People who don't just accept your growth, but encourage it. Because the right people will stretch with you. They will adjust. They will evolve. They will celebrate the new version of you, even if it's different from what they're used to. They won't try to keep you the same, they'll help you become better. And when you have that kind of support, everything changes. You stop feeling guilty for growing. You stop questioning your evolution. You stop shrinking to stay comfortable. You move forward with clarity, with confidence, with purpose, not because everyone understands, but because the right people believe. So if you keep hearing echoes of your past every time you talk about your future, pay attention, because that's not guidance, that's resistance. And it's trying to keep you in a place you've already outgrown. Now this one can damage you quietly because it doesn't always show up as loud negativity, it shows up as constant judgment. You go to someone looking for guidance, looking for clarity, looking for a way forward. You open up, you become vulnerable. You speak honestly about your struggles, your mistakes, your confusion. And instead of feeling supported, you feel evaluated. Every word you say feels like it's being measured. Every decision you explain feels like it's being criticized. Every mistake you admit feels like it's being held against you. And you walk away from that conversation not feeling guided, but feeling smaller. That's how you know you're asking the wrong people. Because the wrong people don't create space for growth. They create pressure through judgment. They don't listen to understand your situation. listen to assess your worth. They don't help you process your mistakes, they highlight them. They don't guide you through confusion, they make you feel guilty for being confused in the first place. And over time, that kind of environment starts to affect you. You begin to hold back. You begin to filter your words. You begin to hide parts of your truth. Not because you don't need help, but because you don't feel safe asking for it. And that's dangerous. Because growth requires honesty. Growth requires openness. Growth requires the ability to say, I don't have it all figured out, without feeling like you're being judged for it. But when you're surrounded by people who judge more than they guide, you lose that freedom. You start performing instead of progressing. You say what sounds right instead of what's real. You present a polished version of your life instead of the truth you're trying to work through. And now real growth becomes impossible because you cannot fix what you're afraid to reveal. Let me tell you something clearly. Guidance should lift you, not label you. The right people will correct you, but they won't condemn you. They will challenge your decisions, but they won't attack your identity. They will point out your mistakes, but they will also show you a way forward. That's guidance. But judgment traps you. It keeps you stuck in your errors. It makes you feel defined by your worst moments. It creates a mindset where you're constantly trying to avoid being wrong instead of trying to become better. And that mindset, it limits everything. Because now, instead of taking bold steps, you hesitate. Instead of trying new things, you play safe. Instead of learning through experience, you avoid situations where you might fail. Not because you lack courage, but because you've been conditioned to fear judgment. And when you fear judgment, you stop growing. Because growth is messy. Growth involves mistakes. Growth requires you to step into unfamiliar territory where you won't always get it right. But if every mistake becomes a moment of criticism, every misstep becomes a reason for someone to question you, every struggle becomes something you're judged for, you'll stop trying. You'll choose comfort over progress. You'll choose silence over expression. You'll choose safety over expansion. And that's not because you're weak, it's because you've been placed in an environment where guidance has been replaced with judgment. Now here's something you need to recognize. Some people think judgment is guidance. They believe being harsh makes them helpful. They believe pointing out flaws is enough. They believe if they criticize you, they're somehow pushing you to improve. But that's not how growth works. Growth doesn't come from being torn down, it comes from being built up with truth. Yes, you need correction. Yes, you need accountability. Yes, you need someone who can tell you when you're wrong. But there's a difference between correction and condemnation. Correction says, this part needs to change, let me help you improve it. Condemnation says, this is who you are and it's not good enough. And when you're constantly hearing condemnation, you start believing it. You start internalizing those judgments. You start seeing yourself through that lens. You start thinking, maybe I'm not capable, maybe I'm not ready, maybe I'm not enough. Then that belief, it becomes a barrier. Not because it's true, but because it's been reinforced. So now you've got to make a shift. You've got to stop going to people who make you feel ashamed for being in progress. You've got to stop seeking advice from people who make you feel smaller every time you open up. And you've got to start aligning yourself with people who understand the process of growth. People who can look at your mistakes and still see your potential. People who can hear your struggles and still believe in your future. People who don't just point out what's wrong, but invest in helping you make it right. Because the right environment changes everything. When you feel safe, you open up. When you open up, you learn. When you learn, you grow. And growth becomes natural, not forced. You stop fearing mistakes. You stop hiding your truth. You stop shrinking under pressure. You begin to move with confidence, not because you're perfect, but because you're supported. So pay attention to how people respond when you're vulnerable. Do they guide you or do they judge you? Do they build you or do they break you down? Because that response, it matters more than you think. And if every time you seek help, you leave feeling heavier, more insecure, more uncertain, that's your sign. You're not being guided. You're being judged. And it's time to find voices that know how to correct you without crushing you, voices that can hold you accountable without making you feel unworthy, voices that don't just see where you are but believe in where you're going. Now this one, This one reveals itself over time, not in words but in patterns. Some people are always around when things are falling apart. When you're struggling, they show up. When you're confused, they're available. When you're at your lowest, they're right there ready to listen. And at first, it feels like support. It feels like loyalty. It feels like they truly care. But then something strange starts to happen. The moment you begin to rise, the moment things start getting better, the moment you regain your strength, your clarity, your direction, they fade. They become distant, less responsive, less engaged. And you start wondering, where did they go? Nothing happened to them. What happened is you're no longer in the state they connected with. Because some people are attached to your struggle, not your success. They know how to sit with you in pain, but they don't know how to stand with you in progress. They know how to comfort your brokenness, but they don't know how to celebrate your growth. And that's a dangerous place to seek help from, because their presence is not rooted in your potential, it's rooted in your problems. Let me explain it to you like this. Some people feel needed when you're down. When you're struggling, they feel important. When you're confused, they feel valuable. When you're depending on them emotionally, they feel connected. But when you start becoming stronger, when you start needing less, when you start thinking clearly and moving independently, that sense of importance fades for them. And instead of adjusting to your growth, they disconnect from it. Not always intentionally, not always with bad motives, but the pattern is still there. They are consistent in your pain, but absent in your progress. And if you don't recognize it, you'll keep going back to them every time things get hard, because that's when they show up. But that creates a cycle. You struggle, they appear. You rise, they disappear. You fall again, they return. And now your growth becomes inconsistent because your support system is inconsistent. You begin to associate connection with struggle. You begin to feel like you are most supported when you are at your lowest. And without even realizing it, a part of you starts staying in that space longer than necessary. Not because you want to suffer, but because that's where the support exists. That's where the attention is. That's where the presence is. And that's how people get stuck. Because the environment they rely on does not sustain growth, it sustains struggle. Let me tell you something clearly. Real support does not disappear when you improve. Real support evolves with you. The right people will be there when you're down, but they'll also be there when you rise. They'll encourage you when you're struggling, but they'll celebrate you when you're winning. They won't feel distant when you become stronger, they'll feel proud. They won't withdraw when you become independent, they'll feel fulfilled. Because their connection to you is not based on your weakness, it's based on your worth. But the wrong people, they only know how to relate to one version of you. The struggling version, the dependent version, the broken version. And when you start stepping out of that identity, they lose their place in your life, not because you pushed them out, but because they were never aligned with your growth. And instead of rising with you, they retreat. Now here's where you have to be careful. Because when you notice that absence, it can hurt. It can feel confusing. It can make you question the relationship. You might think, did I do something wrong? Did I change too much? Should I go back to how things were? No, you didn't do anything wrong. You just grew. And growth reveals alignment. It shows you who is truly connected to your journey and who was only connected to a moment in your life. So don't let their absence pull you back into a place you've already outgrown. Don't dim your progress just to keep their presence. Because if someone can only stand with you in your pain but not in your purpose, they are not equipped to help you move forward. They might care, but they cannot carry your next level. And you've got to accept that. Because your future requires a different kind of support. It requires people who can handle your growth, who can celebrate your success, who can stand with you when you're no longer struggling. People who don't just show up when you're falling, but stay when you're rising. People who don't need you to be broken to feel connected to you. People who don't disappear when you become strong. And when you find that kind of support, you'll notice something powerful. You'll feel encouraged to keep going. You'll feel safe to keep growing. You'll feel motivated to reach higher. Not because everything is perfect, but because your environment is finally aligned with your progress. So if you've been noticing a pattern, if certain people only show up when things go wrong, but vanish when things go right, pay attention. That's not consistent support. That's conditional presence. And your life is too valuable to be supported only in your struggle. You deserve people who walk with you through every stag, not just the ones that make them feel needed. Because sometimes the reason you're not fully stepping into your next level is because you've been surrounded by people who only know how to meet you at your lowest.